Kakemans, and this is Smart Asset Management Section 2.2, Outsourcing Theories. In the previous section, we saw that in practice there are many problems with outsourcing. Fundamentally, you could say that the practical problem is that if there is a supplier of services and there is a customer of those services, and the supplier wants to make his services more smart, that will typically mean that he will have to invest in new tools, new technologies, new skills, and that will result in better uptime, so better performance for the customer. But if the contract is the way it typically is, which is that the customer pays the supplier on the basis of hours spent on the job and spare parts used, then the customer will benefit, but the supplier who just invested in new tools and new techniques actually gets lower revenues, because most probably there will be fewer hours spent on maintenance and fewer spare parts needed, simply because the equipment is maintained better. So there's a misalignment in time and there's a misalignment in place. And the only way to fix that is through contracts. So let's have a look at contracts. But contracts can be practical, but there is some theory behind them indeed. John Maynard Keynes, who was a practical man working in the stock market in London between the two world wars, was also a Nobel Prize winner in economics, so also a theoretical man. And this is his quote, that practical men who say, hey, theory, that's not my thing, they are usually the intellectual slaves of some defunct economist. So you may think you're a really practical guy, but actually you're just exposing, without knowing it, some theories from people who died a couple of decades ago. Now, what is a theory? Well, basically you can have different kinds of contracts on the two extremes between input-based and output-based. On the input side, you simply compensate services for hours used, materials used. On the output side, you compensate for uptime or volume produced. You can also compensate in between for throughput, so that you actually did what you said you would do. And you can even compensate for the result of your output, the outcome, for how happy the customer is, how big your market share is. Most contracts in maintenance will be input-based and output-based, and you have performance levels. So if you stay in the input side, then the risks lie mainly with the asset owner. If you put it on the outside, then the risks lie mainly with the contractor, with the supplier. Let's be a bit more thorough on this. This comes from what they call agency theory or principal agent theory. That's an established branch in economics, and I've tried to summarize it here visually. So if you have two extremes, behavior on the one side, outcome on the other side, and you have two parties, what they call the supplier and the buyer, or the principal and the agent, then the red factors will actually lead to a greater reliance on outcome-based contracts. Well, quite simply, if the buyer is very risk aversive, then they want to make sure that they don't pay any more. So this is the amount you're going to get. So that's an output-based contract. I want this result, and I don't care how much time you spend on it. If you can measure the outcome quite easily, also more likely that you'll face a contract based on outcome. If you disagree quite clearly, if there are different goals, then the buyer will only say yes if the outcome is quite clearly specified. But of course, if the outcome is very uncertain, then the supplier will not be so happy with an outcome-based contract, because he may be spending lots of time and effort on it, but still no guarantee that there will be good financial compensations. Task programmability, so the degree in which you know beforehand what you should do. On the other hand, the risk aversion of the supplier. If the supplier really is risk averse, then they will not go into an outcome-based contract simply because they want to get paid for their work. The length of the relationship, interestingly, can also have an impact. The longer that parties work with together, the higher the trust is. the more likely it is that both they know what will be happening, but also that there is the expectation that the supplier will not cheat. That's called opportunistic behavior in theory, and also the expectation that the customer will be fair. Some stuff on quality of the information system. If you can really precisely track what's happening, then you can compensate people for what's happening. The more that you have an outcome-based contract, the more likely it is that there will be alignment with the interest of the buyer and therefore performance towards the end customer. So the more that you go to behavior, the less the less inevitable it more or less becomes, or the more possible it becomes that there's misalignment with those with the buyer.